Okay, everyone, I think we're live here. Maybe we have been for a few seconds here. Well, I just clicked the live button. We should be good to go here. Let me know if you can hear me okay, if we're coming through. Christopher Freeland is scheduled to give this mini budget update at 4 p.m. Eastern, which is in about just under 10 minutes now. So we're going to get into this shortly. Going to talk about some expectations that we think could be inside of this mini budget. I've got my coffee here. Hope you guys do too. And we're going to get through this. I think that there's probably going to be a little bit. What the most shocking thing about this is that there's going to be very little in new spending. That's what my guess is right now. Okay, yeah, you guys are coming through. Okay, I think I can see it in the chat there, so that's good. All right, and like we always like to do, we try to get representation from the entirety of Canada, every province. So let me know where you're from and if you're tuning in from anywhere interesting. That's always fun to do. I've got here up on my second screen here, I'll show you. Yeah, there we go. There's my voice. For some reason, when I switched views, it took out my voice. So here's the view that I've got here waiting for this economic statement to start. Awesome. Seeing lots of people in the chat here. We'll flick back to my full cam where I had the chat. And we've got people from... Yeah, we've got Naleo from Hamilton, Crypto Rules Everything from Ontario, Toronto, close to me, Ontario, tuning in from Estonia, interesting the current thing, BC, Ottawa, Nova Scotia from Corey, and Annie from Montreal. It's great to see you all. It's been quite a while since I did a live stream. I think I was looking at it and it was like something like 4 months ago that I did the last live stream, probably pretty close to the last economic update budget. So I'm glad you're all here. It's always nice to be able to chat with you and actually get to talk with you one-on-one. It is more interactive, right, than watching a video, so that's always good. Like I said, we've got the update here all queued up and ready to go. Also, I'm seeing even more people. We've got Scott from Collingwood and Burlington, from Calgary, Amir, and Ema from Niagara Falls, Marco from Montreal. Great to see you all here. Yeah, and thank you, Crypto Rules Everything. Hit the like button. It helps more people find this stream. Okay, so now that we've gotten through the pleasantries, the hello, the hi, how are yous, let's talk about what I think is going to be inside of this budget. If you didn't know, that I put out a little video just before we went live here, just to let people know who watched that video that we're live and we're going to be watching this together. And that went over some of the expectations and some of the things that I'm expecting to see here, and some of the things that some of the other political parties might be looking for here as well. So let's go over some of those. And again, if you have any questions as we're going here, I know you can see the chat up here, but you can tag me with @RussellMatthews. You should be able to click on it and it'll light up on my screen and it'll let me know that you have a question. So the thing that I think the Conservatives have been hammering on for the past month or so is that the two things, right? We have inflation that's too high. We need, one, the Liberals to stop spending. This is what the Conservatives are saying, as well as two, them to commit to no further tax increases. So they're saying that Canadians, life is too expensive. We don't want any more tax increases. This is one of the Conservatives' main points, right? Saying, are you going to freeze all taxes? Freeze all taxes. This is what they've been saying in the House of Commons in these sessions, the question period. Constantly you see Poilievre and Trudeau sort of sparring it out. So I think that they're going to get one out of the two sort of things that they're looking for here. I don't think that they're going to get an absolute freeze on tax increases. This is something that the Liberals have sort of had scheduled for a while, that there was going to be an increase in a couple of different taxes, CPP and EI premiums, right? The Canada Pension Plan and employment insurance premiums. Those are sort of on their regular scheduled increase. The Conservatives are saying we shouldn't be doing that right now when people are struggling to get by. Liberals will say, okay, we need to make sure that we continue to pay into these social safety net programs. So that's one thing I don't think that they're going to see, is a cancellation of the CPP-EI tax contributions. Now, the second one is the carbon tax. The Conservatives have been very against this for quite a long time. Some people think that there's reason for them to be. Some people think that there's not. The Conservatives think that the Liberals' carbon and environmental plan isn't all that great, and that even though they're charging a lot with these taxes, that they're not being effective. Liberals will come back and say that most families get returned the same, if not more, money than they pay into it. So that's their constant sparring. But it's not just a Conservative and Liberal issue here. It's also something that the NDP have weighed in on, saying that they also don't like the carbon tax program from the Liberals, right? Because the main thing here is that the NDP are saying, well, this tax, you're implementing it. We want there to be sort of a price on pollution, but there's no record of you actually hitting any of your economic or your environmental targets. So that's why the NDP don't like the climate tax as it is right now. So I don't think we're going to see a freeze on taxes in this. That's one thing that the Conservatives want. I don't think we're going to see. Second thing that the Liberals have been absolutely hammering is that we need to stop this inflationary spending. This is what they call it, inflationary spending. It's a little bit to evoke emotion, right? The Liberals' inflation. There's parts of it that are domestic here in Canada. There's parts of it that are worldwide. Ultimately, it's sort of a mixture of the two. But they want to make sure that there's no additional spending. And this is something that I think that they're going to, for the most part, get from this budget, because the Liberals have been on record saying we want to be very fiscally prudent. We want to be fiscally prudent. We're going to check over here, make sure the thing... Oh, my audio is so low? Is that what you're saying? Let me know in the chat if everything's okay here. But yeah, so they're saying we're going to be fiscally prudent. This is a pivot from the Liberals, right, who have been traditionally very okay with spending more to support Canadians, but now the tables have turned, and this table turning kind of happened right around when the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, issued a warning to Canada. They said, hey, if you're not careful, you're going to totally screw over the Bank of Canada and what the Bank of Canada is trying to do. If you don't do the right thing here, you're going to be fighting against the very thing that they're like fighting the other way from. You're going to be going two different ways. Okay, it says hard to hear me for some people, so I'm going to make sure that my volume is a little bit higher here and turn up this, and hopefully that should be a little bit better for you. Okay, beautiful. So as of just a couple weeks ago, the Liberals got this warning from the IMF, International Monetary Fund, saying you got to be careful, you're fighting against the Bank of Canada. The Bank of Canada right now is trying to eliminate inflation. They're really scared that inflation is going to be around for the long term. It's going to last for a long time. And if inflation lasts or people think that inflation is going to last for a long time, it could end up lasting even longer. We talked about this yesterday with the wage price spiral conversation. The Bank of Canada doesn't want wages to go up because of inflation, because it could result in it reinforcing inflation, kind of being like a cycle, like a self-reinforcing prophecy, right? A self-fulfilling prophecy is what they call it. Because if we have more wage increases because there's a low worker count in Canada, right? A labor shortage. People have to raise the salaries that they're paying people, raise pay. As a result, people have more money to spend on more goods, and that adds more demand into the economy, and then things start to cost more as a result of that, and then it's sort of like a cycle that repeats itself from there. So that's what the IMF is, or the Bank of Canada is fighting against. If the Liberals were to increase spending or add a lot more spending into this situation, well, some people believe that would cause more inflation, and it would fight against what the Bank of Canada is doing, raising interest rates to destroy demand for goods and services, because it makes people feel more poor, right? And also, like, people are paying more into their loans and their debt servicing, paying more into their mortgages with higher interest rates. That means there's less money to go into the economy to buy other things. People cut their spending. That's what the Bank of Canada is trying to do to bring down inflation. The IMF and the Liberal government are worried that if they introduce a whole bunch of new spending with programs like CERB, CRB, like a UBI program, any kind of comprehensive plan, there's a chance that could actually cause more inflation and then counteract what the Bank of Canada is doing, leading to a longer economic downturn, right? A poor time for everyone. This is what they believe will happen. So in this budget, I think that we're going to see a very little new spending from the Liberals. It'll be a shock, a surprise if we have any other programs here. Let's take a look over here. Okay, it looks like it's starting right now, so I'm gonna turn on this audio. Make sure you can hear it too. And let me know how the levels are. I'm checking the chat right here.
Mr. Speaker,
But here we go. I'm
pursuant
gonna
to
go full
Standing
screen.
Order 32-2, I have the honor to table, in both official languages, the Fall Economic Statement 2022.
Okay, it's starting. Here we go, folks. I'll interject here and there, but mostly it'll be just
Standing
listening.
Order 83-1, I would also like to table
We'll do a full update at the end as well.
Ways and Means motion to implement certain provisions of the Fall Economic Statement tabled in Parliament on November 3rd, 2022, and certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on April 7th, 2022. Pursuant to Standing Order 83-2, I would ask that an order of the day be designated for the consideration of this motion.
Okay, so they cut the audio. Oh, it's back. We got the clapping. Okay. So she introduced the mini budget and the Ways and Means motion, the
Merci
bill that
beaucoup.
would bring this into effect.
Thank
Let's
you very
listen in.
much, Mr. Speaker. For the past several months, I have been traveling across Canada to more than 24 cities and towns to meet with Canadian workers and Canadian businesses. I visited an auto parts manufacturer in Etobicoke, a potash mine outside Saskatoon, and the women and men in Sherbrooke who make the boots our armed forces wear around the world.
I visited the port of St. John in New Brunswick and a family farm in Olds, Alberta, and in Dartmouth and in Brampton and in Calgary. I spent time with some of the truckers who keep our economy humming. The Canadians I spoke to were all so proud of our
Interesting
country.
trucker comment
They
there.
were
with,
proud of the hard
trials
work
going
they
on.
do every day to feed Canada and the world, to build our cars, to send our goods to global markets, to raise their children. But they were also anxious. Anxious about whether our future will be as prosperous as our past, and anxious about paying the bills today. And that's where I want to start, with the high cost of living so many of us, so many Canadians are concerned about. I know that it has felt like just one thing after another since COVID first reached our shores. We turned the economy off, and then we turned it back on again. Vladimir Putin illegally invaded Ukraine. And now we're dealing with inflation. These are related, of course. Global inflation isn't created by the decisions of any one government alone, but by the combined aftershocks of 2.5 years of historic turmoil. L'inflation.
Inflation was 6.9% in September, after following for the third month in a row. That is lower than in the US, the UK, and the Eurozone. But for Canadians feeling the pinch at the checkout counter or when they fill their tanks with gas, it is still too high. This is a challenging time for so many of us, for our friends, for our families, for our neighbors.
It's important, as both the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance, that I'm honest with Canadians about the challenges that still lie ahead. Interest rates are rising as the Bank of Canada steps in to tackle inflation. And that means our economy is slowing down. It means there are people whose mortgage payments are rising. It means business is no longer booming in the same way it has been since we left our homes after the COVID lockdowns and went back out into the world. That's the case in Canada. That's the case in the United States. And that is the case in economies big and small around the world. Canada cannot avoid the global slowdown any more than we could have avoided COVID once it had begun infecting the world. But we will be ready. Indeed, we are ready. That's because for the past 7 years, our government has been reinforcing Canada's social safety net. We have improved many important programs and added some new ones, too.
These investments in Canadians are like a well-built house with a solid roof, needed in all seasons and in all weather, but most essential when the temperature drops. And that is why, as fall turns to winter, we will continue to stand up to those who would cut the EI and the pensions Canadians have been contributing to for their entire working lives.
That's a jab against the Conservatives right now.
Today more than ever.
Because they're constantly saying we want to freeze on taxes.
We created the Canada Child Benefit.
And they're referring to this EICPP tax increase that's scheduled. And she's saying we're fighting against the people who want to
It's why we enhanced the benefits that those who served with our flag on their shoulder depend on. It's why we doubled the Canada Student Grant to make it a little easier for all young people to go to college or university or to pursue an apprenticeship. It's why we enhanced the Canada Workers' Benefit and why we increased both old age security and the guaranteed income supplement.
Brings up another thing that was kind of controversial.
That is why it is so important that
because they split it into two different categories of seniors, 65 to 75 and 75 plus.
Indexed to inflation. And in today's fall economic statement, that is why we're delivering on a plan that millions of Canadians voted for just over a year ago, and why we're delivering new measures to enhance the social safety net that is there to support all Canadians. We're working to deliver lower credit card fees so that small businesses don't need to choose. So that small businesses don't need to choose between cutting into their already narrow margins and passing fees onto their customers. We're taxing share buybacks to make sure that large corporations pay their fair share and to encourage them to reinvest their profits in Canadian workers and in Canada.
That's a rather big one. That's one we talked about in the video. If some of you are coming from the video just posted on the channel.
A multi-generational home renovation tax credit, which will help families across Canada afford to have a grandparent or a family member with a disability move back in if they want to. We're tackling housing speculation and making sure that homes are for Canadians to live in, not a frequently flipped investment asset. We're delivering on our commitment to make home ownership more affordable for young people and new Canadians with a new tax-free first home savings account that will make it so much easier to save for a down payment. And we're delivering with the doubling of the first-time home buyers tax credit to help cover the closing costs that come with buying that.
I thought this was supposed to be a new, like a list of new things. She just talked about the first-time home savings account. We've done videos of that on the channel here. Still not implemented, but from the last budget.
Interest on the federal portion of Canada student loans and Canada apprentice loans. We're working to make sure that families don't need to choose between taking their child to the dentist and putting food on the table. We're creating a new quarterly Canada Workers Benefit to deliver advance payments and put more money sooner into the pockets of our lowest paid and often most essential workers. This means the Canada Workers Benefit will now support 4.2 million Canadians. We're providing hundreds of dollars in new targeted support to low-income renters. For the Canadians who need it the most, we are doubling the GST credit for the next 6 months. And I have some very good news about that. For the 11 million Canadian households who need help the most, those GST checks will start arriving in your bank account or in your mailbox tomorrow. Nous doublons le crédit.
And for the Canadians who need it the most, we are doubling the GST credit for the next 6 months. And I have some very good news. For the 11 million Canadians who need help the most, those GST checks will start arriving.
Yeah, so a lot of talk about the things that we knew were coming. We knew those checks were coming. That was part of Bill C-31 or Bill C-30. We talked about that on the channel. I'm going to clap for it again in French.
Nous offrons.
We are providing targeted inflation relief because that is the right thing to do. And as the Bank of Canada fights inflation, we will not make its job harder. We are compassionate and we are also responsible.
Canada has the lowest deficit and Canada has the lowest deficit
What was that?
and the lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. In our April budget, with inflation in Canada and around the world elevated and still rising, we knew we had to chart a fiscally responsible course. And we did. In April, we committed to bringing the deficit down to just 2% of GDP this year. Today, we forecast it will be just 1.3% of our $2.8 trillion economy. We can bring the deficit down today because our pandemic spending worked. Thanks to the historic support we provided, and thanks to the incredible resilience of Canadians, Canada is entering this time of a slowing global economy from a position of fundamental economic strength. There are 400,000 more Canadians working today than before the pandemic. Our economy is now 103% the size it was before COVID hit. So far this year, Canada's economic growth has been the strongest in the G7, stronger than the United States, stronger than the United Kingdom, stronger than Germany, stronger than France, stronger than Italy or Japan. Thanks to that enviable economic performance, we're able to provide targeted support to the most vulnerable while still shrinking our deficit. In the months to come, we will be able to invest in the Canadian economy and to be there for the Canadians who need it the most, because we were responsible in April and because we are keeping our powder dry today. Canadians are tough, and the Canadian economy is resilient. And that's why we can all be confident we will get through this, just as we have gotten through so much over the past 2.5 years. In fact, there is no country in the world better placed than Canada to get through. There is no country better placed than Canada to get through the coming global slowdown.
And when we do, with our fundamental economic strengths preserved and the pandemic recession behind us, there is no country in the world better placed than Canada to thrive.
So interesting stuff here. She's repeating it in French, what we just heard. She's saying that because of the pandemic spending, we've put ourselves into a good position and that they're going to have dry powder in the future because they're not doing a lot of spending in this budget. She says, hey, maybe we'll have more spending in the future. We're keeping our powder dry. It's our dry powder, our cash that we have. Oh, there's more here.
That are essential for everything, from cell phones to batteries to appliances to electric cars. We have the natural resources to power the global net zero transition and to support our allies with their energy security as that transition continues to pick up speed. And critically, Canada is the democracy that has all of these resources in abundance.
The global economy is at a turning point. We're entering an era of friendshoring, a time when our democratic partners and their most important companies are seeking to shift their dependence from dictatorships to democracies. That's why the Prime Minister and Chancellor Scholz signed an agreement in Newfoundland for Germany to buy Canadian hydrogen. That's why the United States has moved from a Buy America to a Buy North America policy on critical minerals and electric vehicles. C'est pourquoi.
That is why our Minister of Industry has been signing agreements with global car manufacturers and battery makers. A new one almost every day, it seems to me.
That is why our Minister of Natural Resources is pitching Canada's critical minerals to the world and working hard with provinces and territories to get them out of the ground and to global markets. Because the world knows Canada can build the electric vehicles of today and tomorrow. Canadians can mine and process the critical minerals that those vehicles, our phones, and our computers are all made of. And Canadian energy workers, the very best in the world, can make Canada the leading provider of energy as the global economy moves to net zero. Our allies are counting on us. And our government believes that this ongoing shift is the most significant opportunity for Canadian workers and Canadian businesses in a generation. Les investissements.
Seizing this opportunity is what our April budget invested in. And it is what this fall economic statement invests in too. With major investment tax credits for clean technology and clean hydrogen, we will make it more attractive for businesses to invest in Canada to produce the energy that will power a net zero global economy.
We are launching a new Canada Growth Fund that will help attract the billions of dollars in new private capital required to fight climate change and to create good jobs in Canada at the same time. From critical minerals to ports to energy, we will continue to make it easier for businesses to invest in major projects in Canada. Projects with meaningful Indigenous participation, projects that meet the highest environmental standards, projects that will create good jobs, and projects that will allow Canadian workers to drive our economy forward. We will continue to invest in tackling the productivity challenge that is Canada's economic Achilles heel. We will continue to invest in making sure that Canadians have the skills they need to get good-paying jobs, and we will continue to bring to Canada more of the skilled workers that our growing economy requires. But we know that these investments represent only a down payment on the work that lies ahead. And so, in the months to come, we will continue to work hard to ensure that Canada is the best place in the world for businesses to invest and create good-paying jobs from coast to coast to coast. Yep. Now, these investments, the ones we're making today and the ones we will continue to make, will be crucial to the future of the Canadian economy. They will help make Canada a leader in the industries of tomorrow. They will help to build an economy that is more sustainable and more prosperous for generations to come. But what matters most is what these investments mean for Canadians. If you're an energy worker in Alberta, investments in clean energy mean there will continue to be good-paying jobs for you and your children. If you're a young couple in Vancouver, more workers in the building trades means more affordable homes for your new family. And if you're an auto worker in Windsor, Canadian leadership on electric vehicles means you will build the next generation of the cars that have powered our economy for more than a century.
Bravo.
Canadian workers know how important our social safety net is, and that is why our government will never deplete the contributions that keep Canada's employment insurance and pensions strong.
Another shot at the Conservatives.
Et les Canadiens.
And Canadian workers know how important training is to equip them for valuable, good-paying jobs. So we are investing in that as well. But Canadian workers also know that the single most important thing, the difference between managing to pay your mortgage and fearing you could lose your home, the difference between paying the bills at the end of the month and falling behind, is a well-paid, stable job. Doing work that you are proud of with people who respect you and your skills. That's why our overriding economic objective during COVID was to preserve Canadians' jobs. And that's why today, what Canadian workers need is a government with a real, robust industrial policy, a government committed to investing in the net zero transition, to bringing in new private investment, and to help create good-paying jobs from coast to coast to coast. And that is exactly what we've been doing. And that is what we are continuing to do today.
Now, Mr. Speaker, in 1903, Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier stood in this House, and he said, "This is not a time for deliberation. This is a time for action. We cannot wait because time does not wait. We cannot wait because in these days of wonderful development, time lost is doubly lost. We cannot wait because at this moment there is a transformation going on in the conditions of our national life, which it would be folly to ignore and a crime to overlook. He was speaking then about the Transcontinental Railway, one that connected Canada and the Canadian economy from east to west, and which helped usher in a new era of prosperity for the people of our growing country. That project, like Laurier himself, was imperfect. The prosperity and opportunity it brought were not shared equally with Indigenous peoples, with women, with new Canadians. But his message then is one that we should heed today, that we must heed today. At the turn of the last century, Laurier and a generation of Canadian statesmen understood that Canada was at a turning point and that we could seize it or risk being swept aside by the manifest destiny of more ambitious leaders. Today, we are likewise at a pivotal moment. The global green transition calls for an industrial transformation comparable in scale only to the Industrial Revolution itself. And Canada is blessed with the talented people, the natural resources, and the manufacturing base needed to drive that transformation. At the same time, Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine has upended geopolitics, reinforcing for our allies the value of turning to each other, to us, for the critical elements of their supply chains and for their energy security. Together, these two great shifts represent a generational opportunity to build a thriving and sustainable Canadian economy. We can lead the world in a way that far exceeds our footprint as a country of just 39 million people. Nous pouvons mener la lutte contre les...
We can lead the fight against climate change, and we can do it in a way that creates good jobs and new businesses for Canadians from coast to coast to coast. We can build affordable homes and deliver affordable childcare, helping our economy grow and making life more affordable for middle-class families. And we can ensure that everyone in this country can enjoy the prosperity we are investing in together. That is the future that we can create for ourselves and for our children. But we cannot wait, because time truly does not wait. We cannot wait because in these days of wonderful development, time lost is doubly lost. I know that times feel tough right now, and they are. But we have a well-built house with a solid roof, and we have survived far colder winters before. And just as fall turns to winter, so too does winter turn to spring.
Ahead, and we will reach them together by building a country where everyone can earn a good living for a hard day's work, by building an economy that works for everyone, by investing in the Canada we are all so proud of today, so that we can be even prouder of our amazing country tomorrow. Because of all the countries in the world, the 21st century will surely belong to Canada.
Okay, let's pause here and see if there's going to be more that she talks about, but it seems like those were the main points. If you're just tuning in, of course, I'm going to do a live update of all of the major things included in here. We're going to take a closer look here, but we're going to listen to some of the criticism here
Prime
first.
Minister's policies have caused 4-year highs in inflation, leading to massive interest rate hikes on Canadians, which will cost Canadian families $3,000 a year. Today, the Prime Minister had a chance to give Canadians some relief by cancelling the carbon tax on home heating, but they refused. They refused, despite the fact home heating bills will increase by 50 to 100% this winter. They refused, despite billions in new tax revenue on the growling stomachs of Canadians. Will the Prime Minister stop punishing Canadians and cancel their plans to triple the carbon tax on home heating?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we absolutely understand that times are tough for so many Canadians today. And that's why I was so glad to share some great news. And that is that the GST credit will start arriving in the bank accounts and in the mailboxes of 11 million Canadian households tomorrow. That is much needed support. It is going to provide such valuable inflation relief to the Canadians who need it the most. But that's not all, Mr. Speaker. We are moving forward with $500 to support the Canadians who are struggling to pay their rent. Again, much needed support for the people who need it the most. And that's not all, Mr. Speaker. We are moving forward to ensure that never again in Canada will a mother have to choose between buying groceries and taking her kid to the dentist. That is not right in Canada, and we are going to change that, Mr. Speaker. There's a lot more we're going to do, and I'll talk about it in a minute.
There's a lot more we're going to do, and we'll talk about it in a minute. She would have included that in her speech, right?
Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Minister for her speech. She spouted a lot of rhetoric, but when we look at the concrete measures that are in the economic statement, when we try to see what is new relatively to the spring budget, well, we can see that there isn't much. She has just given 2 examples, which are measures that were already passed before today's presentation of the statement. What I like in her speech is that she recognizes that we're in a financial crisis and that there's a recession coming. But what I'm upset about is that there are no new tangible measures to tell Canadians and Quebecers what the government is going to do to support them. For example, the Bloc Québécois said, well, if we're heading into a recession, then we know that the EI system doesn't work. It's broken, and it's now or never. It's time to repair it before we hit a recession. But there's nothing announced to that end in the statement. And what about the increase in prices? What are seniors going to do, especially those aged 65 to 75 who did not receive an addition to their benefits? There are no new measures for seniors, and they can't make ends meet anymore. There are no tax measures either to incentivize workers if they want to, for example, seniors who want to work a few days a week. And finally, when it comes to healthcare, we know that all provincial and Quebec health systems, they're all broken. And in a few days, the health ministers are going to be meeting across the country with the federal health minister. But what are they going to discuss if there are no new measures? We were hoping that we would get the $28 billion and a firm commitment to have an increase of 6% per year. And they're going to meet in 4 days. But what are they going to discuss? Because there's nothing new in this statement. So we know that there are problems coming. We know we're in the midst of problems. But there are no new measures in this statement. So how is it going to work? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I would like to begin by underscoring that this is a fall economic statement. It's not a budget. It's a continuation of the work that we began in April and that we're going to continue to do. And I have a great deal of respect for the member across the way. But I would like to point out that we have already announced and implemented and delivered support measures that will make a huge difference in the lives of Canadians. For example, the GST credit. That is real support. What about rental relief? That's a real measure. What about the new dental care plan? That is real support as well. And I will be announcing new measures, major new measures, in the coming weeks and months. We understand that times are particularly tough right now. And for that very reason, our government will be there for Canadians with assistance for our students and for our most essential workers as well, because many of them are very poorly remunerated. So I think that's a very important measure. I think it's a targeted measure, and it's going to help people who need it the most. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments, questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Elmwood Transcona.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There are certainly some items that the Finance Minister has mentioned that are very familiar to us New Democrats, because they're the things that we have been pressuring this government into doing, whether that's dental care, whether it's the Canada Housing Benefit, frankly, whether it's child care, or many other things that we could go on about, including the GST rebate that's coming to Canadians tomorrow. But today was an opportunity to go above and beyond those things, to address the real challenges that people are facing as we come into a fall and they're worried about home heating and the cost of groceries. And as we learn that Loblaws is making $1 million a day more in profit above their latest banner year. So what we thought we might have seen, in addition to things that the NDP has required of the government to move on, were things like more serious consequences for price fixing in the grocery industry. We wanted to see a windfall profit tax so that these companies that are making extraordinary profits in the pandemic context are required to pay more in order for there to be assistance for Canadians. We want to see the GST on home heating removed, a measure that would apply across the country and not just in provinces that are subject to the federal carbon tax. We want to see that the government is now starting to indicate there may be a recession coming, except that they just reverted to the pre-pandemic broken EI system just as people are starting to worry about looking for work. Where is the promised EI modernization reform that the government has been talking about forever? And I also want to say I was very disappointed to note that the only reference to health care in this document is about dental care. That's a good thing. We should be moving forward on that. But at a time when most Canadians don't trust that if they go to the emergency room, they're going to be seen and helped, we need way more investment in healthcare, working collaboratively, of course, with the provinces. But we need to see that the federal government is willing to come to the table with those dollars. So on all these many things that this was an opportunity to take action on, why haven't we seen any action on those important issues?
The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this is the first time that I've answered a question from the member for Transcona since the death of his father, who served honorably here. And I do want to start by paying tribute to him. He was a very important person for Canadians, for his constituents, and for progressive causes in Canada. Now, Mr. Speaker, I do believe that this is a fall economic statement that will make a difference in the lives of Canadians. It will make a difference in the lives of the Canadians who need help the most. And Mr. Speaker, one of the themes in this fall economic statement is support for hard-working Canadians. And you see that in the Canada Workers Benefit. We are moving this to an advance payment because people who work really, really hard for really low pay, they can't wait until the fiscal year is over to get that top up. They need it while they're working. And I think they deserve it, Mr. Speaker. We should be rewarding them for doing those hard jobs and encouraging them to do it. So this is an important measure. I am really, really glad that it is here. And I want to say how much I thank all of those hardworking people who get the Canada Workers Benefit and how much I respect them. Mr. Speaker, there's another element in this fall economic statement which is directly about supporting hardworking Canadians and making sure there are great jobs for them. And that is that in our green tax credits, in the hydrogen credit, in the clean tech tax credit, we have included provisions for high-wage, good jobs and apprenticeships. That's the first time we've done that, Mr. Speaker. It will make a big difference.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Here's Poilievre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we learned that the Costly Coalition would be introducing this economic update today, we had two demands. No new taxes on workers and seniors, and no new spending unless matched by equal savings. Today, this inflationary scheme triples the tax on home heat, gas, and groceries, and adds $20 billion of inflationary spending that will drive up the cost of living. And so, Conservatives will stand for the common people, their paychecks, their homes, their savings, and we will vote against this inflationary scheme. Quand les conservateurs ont appris que la coalition
When we Conservatives learned that the Costly Coalition was going to table this fall economic statement, we had two demands. First,
so this is just a repetition in French, but it seems like the Conservatives didn't get what they wanted out of this budget because it looks like there is more spending inside of this bill than they would have liked, and there wasn't the freeze on taxes that they were looking for also.
That this inflationary scheme is hiking up the cost of home heat, gas, and groceries. Conservatives defend Canadians, regular Canadians. We stand up for their savings, their paychecks, their quality of life, and we stand against this inflationary scheme.
How did we get here? Well, the cost of government is driving up the cost of living. $500 billion of inflationary deficits have bid up the cost of the goods we buy and the interest that we pay. Inflationary taxes have increased the cost of businesses, farmers, and workers to produce those very same goods. Now, Liberals will pretend that they had no choice but to double the debt. This Prime Minister will claim that it's not his fault that he added more debt than all previous Prime Ministers combined. Let's start with the fact that he added $100 billion of debt before the very first COVID case was ever discovered here in Canada. He can't blame COVID for that. In fact, he blew through his promise that the deficit would never exceed $10 billion. Well, it was already $100 billion in total before the first case of COVID. Then when COVID came, 40% of all the new spending measures had nothing to do with COVID, according to the Prime Minister's own named parliamentary budget officer. $200 billion of spending unrelated to COVID. And even amongst the COVID spending was an all-you-can-eat buffet of waste and mismanagement. They sent CERB checks to prisoners. They sent them to public servants who were simultaneously drawing public salaries. They gave wage subsidies to wealthy corporations that were rich enough to pay out dividends and bonuses to their executives, even after I warned that they should ban that hideous practice. They tried to give $500 million to the We Charity, an organization that had given $500,000 to the Prime Minister's own family. They spent $54 million on an app we didn't need, that didn't work, and that could have been designed in a weekend for 250 grand. The previous Conservative government had successfully delivered apps that were actually necessary and useful of a similar complexity for $200,000 or $300,000, but somehow this one went to $54 million. Many of the recipients admit they didn't do any work. They just hired other people to do work. Wow. So they gave the money to people who didn't do anything other than delegate the work to someone else. Don't we have public servants getting paid within the government to deliver those sorts of contracting? And now the government won't even tell us all of the identity of the recipients of that money. Yeah. So don't tell me they had to double the size of the national debt. Don't tell me that every dollar of inflationary spending was necessary. They were irresponsible and they were unnecessarily profligate with the dollars of Canadians, and now people are paying the price. That's right. Yeah. Now the Prime Minister will say, well, Russia caused the inflation in Canada. Yeah. Well, of course, we do less than 0.3% of our trade with Russia and Ukraine combined, beyond which the stuff they make is the stuff that we have here already. They have energy and food. We have energy and food. If only the Prime Minister would get out of the way of our farmers and energy workers and let them produce. Beyond which, under the previous Conservative government, there were wars. There was massive war in Afghanistan, another one in Iraq and Syria, and we never had inflation anywhere over 4%. In fact, we were able to successfully contribute to defeating terrorists and tyrants in those conflicts while keeping the inflation level low here in Canada. Right. We were able to get our spending under control and our budget back into balance. This government, by contrast, has spending today 30% higher than in the pre-COVID year 2019. Why? They said all the deficits were the result of COVID. COVID now is behind us and spending is still 30% higher, because we know that it is not COVID that has caused the cost to rise. It is a costly coalition and an irresponsible Prime Minister who have put these burdens on Canadian shoulders.
We all know that government spending today is 30% higher than it was the year before COVID. Why? Well, because COVID is not to blame for all this rising spending, exorbitant spending. What is to blame is a Prime Minister who has no control over Canadians' money. The more the Prime Minister spends, the more Canadians pay, and that's why we have just inflation, the highest inflation in 40 years.
Also loves to blame all the cost of living rises on other people. Well, why is it then that house prices in this country are the second most inflated anywhere on planet Earth?
It's true.
Thank you. Why is it that land costs have gone through the roof? Land is not imported from Ukraine or Russia. Right. Land is right beneath our feet. Yeah. And we have the second biggest supply of it anywhere on Earth. Yeah. And yet, Vancouver is the third most overpriced housing market on planet Earth, and Toronto the 10th. Can you imagine that? Two of our biggest cities have more inflated housing prices than New York City, than London, England, than countless other big metropolises that have more people, more money, and less land. In fact, Vancouver's house prices are more inflated than Singapore. Singapore is an island. Wow. They're out of land. Canada has more land where there's no one than we have land where there's anyone. So why is it that we cannot find a place to house everyone? Well, the first reason is that local government gatekeepers prevent housing construction by piling on massive delays that drive up the cost and drive down the supply of housing. This Prime Minister has had 7 years to stand up to the municipal and provincial gatekeepers that stand in the way of housing construction. But he would never do that because he does not want to confront the Liberal, NDP, radical left at city halls across the country that have made this problem worse. And so And so what he's done instead is continued to shovel money into their local bureaucracies to reward them for blocking the poor, for blocking the immigrants, for blocking our working class kids from ever owning a home. When I'm Prime Minister, we will impose conditions that if cities want more federal infrastructure money, they'll have to remove the gatekeepers. We will connect their infrastructure dollars to the number of houses that actually get built so that young people can find a place to live. And we will sell off 15% of the 37,000 federal buildings so that they can be converted into housing and our young people can have affordable homes. The second reason that we have such expensive housing and such expensive everything is because the Prime Minister engaged in a massive orgy of money printing over the last 2 years. Now, he said that money printing wouldn't cause inflation, right? Even though that's exactly what it has done every single time it has been tried over the last roughly 3,000 years, right? Right. So here's how it worked. The Prime Minister wanted to be able to claim that he was borrowing all this money on the cheap. He loved to stand in the House and say that his debt wasn't costing any money because interest rates were so low. Well, the only reason he could borrow for next to nothing is because his central bank was creating the cash out of thin air. If it had been real lenders, they would have demanded a real rate of return on their loans. So what happened is they created something called quantitative easing. Whenever they invent new incomprehensible terminology, Mr. Speaker, you can be sure that there's something sinister behind it. And here's how it works. Very simple. The government sells bonds to lenders. Bank of Canada buys back those bonds at a higher price. The lenders love it. That's why the banks thoroughly endorse this strategy, because they made the money on the difference. Simple arbitrage. The government sells them something on a Monday and buys it back for them at a higher price on a Wednesday. Who wouldn't go for that deal? Well, unfortunately, only about 100 financial institutions are eligible to participate in it. The rest of the ordinary, hardworking Canadians who pay for it are not. But the banks and the insurance companies and other financial institutions profited off of this transaction. Now, the Bank of Canada pays for those bonds by depositing money in the accounts of those
settlement
large
balances.
financial institutions held on reserve at the Bank of Canada. And so those reserves skyrocketed over the last 2 years, and as the bank bought up to $400 billion of new debt. And what happened? That exploded the money supply, and more dollars chasing fewer goods reached higher prices. Much of the money then funneled into the financial system and was lent out in mortgages to wealthy investors who saw a massive expansion in the number of real estate holdings they could accumulate. Thus, housing prices went up 50% in 2 years, creating the biggest housing bubble in Canadian history. And now that the central bank is forced to raise interest rates, it risks bursting that bubble. And all the people that got on the balloon when it was on the ground floor and it went up into the sky now risk coming crashing down as that balloon is bursting. And worse than that, the Bank of Canada now has hundreds of billions of dollars of deposits that it made into the accounts that it has on its reserves of those large financial institutions. Well, what's happened to those deposits? They now bear more interest because interest rates have gone up. So the wealthy bankers that participated in this arbitrage transaction at the beginning and were paid for it by having their more money deposited into their accounts at the Bank of Canada now collect 3.75% because that is the policy rate that the bank pays. Now, what does that mean? That the central bank is now losing money for the first time in its history, and Canadian taxpayers are forced to bail them out to a tune of $4 billion every year. This entire wretched scheme, of which I warned 2 years ago, will maybe in the end amount to the single biggest wealth transfer from working class people to ultra wealthy insiders, from the have-nots to the have-yachts at any time in our history. Mr. Speaker, and now we see the painful consequences. It's not just about numbers on a ledger. It's about 1.5 million people forced to go to a food bank in a single month. It's about 1 in 5 people skipping meals or cutting portions because they can't afford their food. It's about the forthcoming winter, of which the minister spoke in metaphorical terms, who are now not going to be able to heat their homes as the cost of home heating is expected to double or even more for those people who are on home heating oil. It is about the 35-year-old living in his parents' basement, despite the fact that he did everything we asked him to do. He got a job, he got an education, he worked hard at every day, and now he can't afford a home, which means he can't build up collateral, cannot build credit history, cannot build savings for his future, and therefore cannot start a family. In Canada, a country with the most abundant, among the most abundant supply of land on earth, we can't find places for people to live. These are the real-world consequences of irresponsible decisions. And meanwhile, the Prime Minister sits and smirks at the fact that he took a $6,000 a night vacation to sleep in the fanciest hotel on planet Earth, staying up in opulent hotel lobbies, jazzing it up with his friends, while people back home cannot pay the rent. Canadians are out of money, and this Prime Minister is out of touch. So, Mr. Speaker, the question is, we're going to inherit this mess, all of us.
Yeah.
We're going to have to fix the problem. We have a big job ahead of us, don't we?
Yeah,
we have a very big job ahead of us. He'll leave a big mess just like his dad left. He'll be off on a beach somewhere surfing, and the rest of us will be busy working in here cleaning up the mess he left behind. The sooner that happens, the better it is. His own hotels, right? Because we won't be paying for them anymore. He'll have to pay his own way, like Canadians are today. So how are we going to clean up this mess? Well, for one, we're going to bring in a pay-as-you-go law so that every time we bring in a new dollar of spending, we'll find the savings to pay for it. You know who does that? Everybody in the real world. Everybody in the real world does that. C'est comme ça que les mères monoparentales payent leurs factures.
That's how single mothers pay the bills. When they want to take their children on vacation, they find savings, they make savings in order to pay for it. That's what small businesses do. When they want to spend more money on advertising, they find ways to save elsewhere in the business. That's normal. That's what people do. That is what people do in the real world.
Is the condition that faces every creature in the universe. If there's only so much to go around, every creature in the universe except for the Prime Minister just takes everyone else's money to pay for his own wants and desires. But we're going, in the real world, when people, if a family wants a new deck, well, they might pass up on their vacation, or they find a deal on both the vacation, and maybe they pick up some used lumber at a local construction yard in order to save some money, right? So that they can do it all within the same budget. Imagine if instead of just piling on new spending all the time, the government actually had to find savings to pay for it. That would force the same real-world trade-offs.
Just going to interrupt the honourable leader of the opposition. I thought everything was going very smoothly and very nicely. We're respecting each other. Let's keep up. Let's keep that up. And we'll let.
I always find this hilarious. Like they've got the Speaker of the House, like it's like a kindergarten room.
I'm not allowed to mention the presence or absence of the Prime Minister, but I will just say that some people bring happiness wherever they go and others bring happiness whenever they go. So we're going to cap government spending. We're going to get the Bank of Canada back to its core mandate. For 25 years, the Bank of Canada had a very simple mandate, 2% inflation. Brought in by the Mulroney government, stick to 2%. Interest rates, money supply were all governed to that purpose, and it worked. It worked until this Prime Minister came along and pushed the bank to print cash to pay for his spending. We're going to have no more of that. We will fund our programs with real money rather than printed cash, because we know that there are no freebies in this world, and we know that ultimately the taxpayer and the consumer pay for everything. We will reinstate that mandate, and we will audit the central bank through the Auditor General to make sure that never again is there such a horrendous abuse of our money as we have seen over the last couple of years. Instead of creating more cash, we're going to create more of what cash buys. We're going to grow more food, build more houses, and produce more resources right here in Canada. Here's how we'll do it. Here's how we'll do it. We'll incentivize our municipalities to remove their gatekeepers so that we can build more houses on the ground. We will remove the gatekeepers off the back of our farmers by canceling the tariffs and taxes on their fertilizers and on their fuel so that they can produce more in this country. And we will remove the government gatekeepers that stand in the way of our resource sector. Do you know that in Canada today, we have the second slowest building permits of any country in the OECD? Second, the only worst country is the Slovak Republic. In Canada, you take all the types of building permits that exist, everything from a renovation permit on a house all the way up to a full uranium mine, and you average it out. In Canada, the average permit time is 250 days. In South Korea, it's 28 days. Wow. So you want to wonder why investors are taking their money to places like South Korea, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, Switzerland, Ireland. Why? Because you can actually get things built in those countries. So that's what we're going to do in this country. We're going to compress the timelines and speed up approvals. We're going to challenge all levels of government to meet the goal of having Canada as the fastest place to deliver a building permit anywhere in the developed world. The minister said today she's going to go and pitch the world on our critical minerals. Problem is she can't get them out of the ground, right? She's going to tell everyone that they exist. Oh, you're out there in that field. There's some lithium and copper and nickel. But if you have to wait 7 years for us to give a permit for anyone to dig that mine, she says she's going to give out a bunch of corporate welfare to mining companies. But those mining companies who can fill their bank accounts with taxpayers' cash, if they can't get a permit to dig the mine, they won't be able to turn it into anything other than big, fat boondoggles for taxpayers. So we will repeal the anti-energy law, C-69, so that we can build Canadian pipelines with Canadian steel that take Canadian energy to Canadian marketplaces and to around the world. We're going to eliminate the anti-investment taxes that pile on the back of our entrepreneurs so that it is actually rewarding to build things in this country. We are going to axe the carbon tax so that it's actually possible for our industries to compete and for our people to afford energy in this country. And as for energy, there are two very different approaches. Over there, they believe that we should tackle climate change by making traditional energy that Canadians rely on more expensive. We believe in tackling climate change by making new alternatives more affordable. We'll do that, yes. We will do that by incentivizing and speeding up permits to mine lithium, copper, cobalt, graphite, and other necessary minerals that will eventually go into Canadian-made electric cars and to other forms of renewable energy. We will incentivize the production of these energies here in Canada. We will incentivize nuclear energy here on Canadian soil so that we can power our economy emissions-free. And yet, oui, aussi, on va enlever.
We will also cut down on red tape for dams in Quebec. We know that in Quebec, they don't sell enough electricity for the future of electric cars and for the other needs of a green future. Their solution is to build dams. The Premier or the Prime Minister wants to delay the construction of these dams by duplicating procurement processes. We agree with the government of Quebec. We don't need to add another 3-4 years of delays for these projects because the government of Quebec already has processes in place to protect the environment. Quebecers are able to protect the environment, and we will help them by allowing the construction of hydroelectric dams.
And finally, we will make this a country where work pays again. Right? It doesn't pay to work for a lot of people, whether you're on disability and you've recovered to a point, or you've arrived at a point in your life where you realize you could work 10 or 15 hours and you want to get out into the world and contribute. The clawbacks right now mean that many people on disabilities lose more than $1 for every extra dollar they earn. This government published a report showing that a single mother with 3 kids earning $55,000 a year who earns another dollar loses 80 cents on that dollar. So she earns about $25 an hour. She loses in clawbacks of her benefits and taxes on her income 20 of those dollars. So her real wage on that extra hour worked is $5 an hour. Nobody in Canada should be expected to work for $5 an hour. Right. That is an outrage, and that is why my government will reform our tax and benefit system to ensure that whenever somebody works an extra hour, takes an extra shift, or earns an extra bonus, they are always better off. They always keep more of that dollar. We will do this to restore the Canadian promise. You know, I look around this chamber and I see many inspiring stories, like my finance critic who rose up today to ask the first question. The son of immigrants who grew up in a tough neighborhood with a difficult childhood, but was able to get a diploma in accounting, which he's putting to very good use in this house. He started a business, built homes, got elected to serve in a G7 parliament. I myself am the son of a 16-year-old unwed mother who had to put me up for adoption to two school teachers. But they always taught me that it didn't matter where I came from. It mattered where I was going. It didn't matter who I knew. It mattered what I could do. That is the country I want my children to inherit, and that is the country we will fight for every single day in this house.
Wow, that was quite a speech for following an economic update. I didn't see anything like that from O'Toole.
The Honourable Minister for Families.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Leader of the Opposition for that response. Because he was honest with Canadians, the Canadians that he's not going to be supporting through this fall economic statement. Right. He told them right away, students, for example, that he's not going to support the permanent elimination of interest on student loans. He told the lowest income workers that he's not going to support the continuation of the Canada Workers Benefit and making sure that they get that in advance. And he talked about incentivizing companies to invest in Canada, but actually in the fall economic statement, Mr. Speaker, there are really important measures that are going to help us build the economy of the future. But Mr. Speaker, this is very consistent with his actions to date, whether it's the Canada Child Benefit, whether it is the Canada Dental Benefit, the Canada Housing Benefit, whether it is supporting low-income workers and those most vulnerable in our country. He has consistently refused to stand up for them and to support them. Mr. Speaker, he talks a big game, but when there's actual action to do, he doesn't deliver. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, first of all, the Conservative government created what this government now changed the name to the Workers' Benefit. We created that benefit in the first place because we wanted to allow, along with increasing the personal exemption, to allow more and more Canadians to be off the tax rolls altogether and keep a bigger share of their paychecks. Furthermore, the child benefit, they wanted to take the money away from parents and give it to bureaucrats. We were the ones that put the money directly in parents' pockets. And you know, all they talk about today, they don't realize is something very simple. That the government can't give people anything without taking it away. The government doesn't have any money. First they try taxing it, which makes people worse off. Then they try borrowing it, which means that future generations are worse off. And then when they ran out of those two options, because they'd run out of other people's money, they tried printing the money, and now we have 40-year highs in inflation. You know, Doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. Stop the insanity. Stop the inflation.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? L'honorable.
The Honourable Member for Terrebonne. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The economic statement sets out a number of problems, as the member for Joliette mentioned. Supply chain problems, inflation. It also mentions a possible recession coming. Unfortunately, what we've quickly noted is there is a lack of concrete measures. The Bloc Québécois, contrary to the Conservative Party, had proposed a number of progressive measures to help Quebecers and Canadians in the coming years. In the coming years, that will probably be difficult. You could really say that the Liberal government works in silos. Not only is it not listening to the concrete measures put forward by the opposition, but they work in silos. Two examples. We've been promised EI reform for a number of months. Unfortunately, we haven't seen it. The economic statement says that it isn't even planned in the coming 6 months. Another example, the Minister of Industry has promised a reform of the Competition Office, but there's nothing on that in the economic statement. Can the member for Carleton give his opinion on the fact that the Liberal government really seems disconnected and doesn't seem to work as a team?
L'honorable.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Yes. Yes, the government is disconnected.
Thanks so much, Nulio. That's nice of you. Coffee money for all the work ahead of you. Definitely a lot of things to break down here for you folks. We're going to keep listening and then I'll get into it. Thanks again,
When
Nulio.
Canadians
Very nice of you.
can't pay their bills, when Canadians are skipping meals, he's forcing those same people to pay for a $6,000 a night hotel. Yesterday, he admitted that it was him in the infamous $6,000 a night room. By accident, he told the truth. That's the only way we get the truth from this Prime Minister. It's important not because $6,000 will bankrupt the Canadian government, but because it shows that it's a Prime Minister who's disconnected, who doesn't understand the daily reality of Canadians who are working hard but can't pay their bills. Conservatives will stand up for the average Canadian, for their paycheck, their savings, their house, and their country. Thank you.
Questions et commentaires? Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Elmwood-Transcona.
Speaker, and in the brief time that I have, there are two aspects of the Conservative leader's speech that I'd like to address. The first is his comments about home heating and the Conservative desire to remove the carbon tax on home heating. Of course, he'll know that New Democrats are prepared to work with people here across party lines to get things done. He and I, in fact, did that at the Finance Committee before he was leader in order to ensure that an iteration of the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy Program wouldn't allow for the payment of dividends to companies while they were on the take in respect of the wage subsidy. So we've extended our hand here a number of times in the House to say that while we support carbon pricing, we want to see an elimination of the GST on home heating. And we've seen Conservatives refuse NDP amendments to that effect. So I wonder if today here we might get a commitment from the Leader of the Official Opposition that he will work with New Democrats in order to take the GST off of home heating. And if I have a little bit more time, Mr. Speaker, I'd love to get into that second issue, which of course was his comments about building permits. Because building permits are a municipal issue. I'm glad he's taking an interest. I think that's important in order to address the housing issue. But I know that when it comes to workers' rights and the preemptive use of the notwithstanding clause, he's claimed that because it's in another jurisdiction, he won't comment. Seeing as he's willing to comment on other jurisdictional matters today, yes, will he get up and condemn the preemptive use of the notwithstanding clause?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, on the first of all, I'd like to offer the Honourable Member condolence on the loss of his father, who was indeed a wonderful gentleman. Secondly, on the issue of, he is right, we did work together to try and stop the government from giving tax money to companies so that they could spend it on bonuses and dividends for their wealthy executives. Third, on the issue of building permits, well, actually, it's not true that building permits are exclusively municipal. We have federal permitting for large-scale resource projects, and for large-scale resource projects do require federal permits. In fact, there are far too many projects that require federal permitting, and one of the reasons why we can't get pipelines and many other resource projects built is because of the immense delays that are imposed by the federal government on local projects. When we were in government, we made a rule during the Economic Action Plan: one project, one approval. Because prior to that, oftentimes the same consulting firm was hired to do 3 separate environmental assessments, delaying the project and driving up the costs. So we said one project, one permit. That's what we're going to do when I am Prime Minister, and that is why we're going to get more dams built in Quebec. We're going to deliver more Canadian clean, low-carbon, upstream oil and gas projects. We're going to deliver civilian-grade uranium, and we're going to have more nuclear energy, and other major projects are going to happen quickly and effectively. And finally, yes, I will attach conditions to federal tax dollars that go to municipal governments. These woke left-wing mayors keep telling us they're out of money for housing, but yet they're the ones driving up the cost of housing. If they want me to burden taxpayers by sending more money to their municipal governments, they need to get out of the way, remove their gatekeepers, and build more homes.
Questions and comments, commentaires. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands. A 1-minute question, and hopefully we'll have a 1-minute answer as well.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, I do believe brevity is the soul of wit. I'll try to go faster than 1 minute. To the honourable opposition leader, definitely comic timing is his forte. But my question is this. He suggested the Liberals have invented a complicated term called quantitative easing. Does he really believe the Liberals invented it? And if so, I urge him to ask Dr. Google quantitative easing, quotes from Jim Flaherty.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition, in 50 seconds or less, please.
Google that, because Jim Flaherty was against quantitative easing. Against it. And, we specifically said we wouldn't do it, and we didn't do it, and we proved this nonsense today that this government had to do quantitative easing because the Americans did it. That's the excuse. The Americans did it in 2008, 9, and 10. They printed money like crazy. They ballooned income and wealth inequality as a result. Here in Canada, we said no. We banned our Bank of Canada from doing that, and as a result, we didn't have an inflation crisis, we kept our debts low, and we kept income inequality lower than they would have been. We can have an independent monetary policy. Our mothers taught us, just because all your friends are jumping off a bridge doesn't mean that you have to.
Resuming debate. The honourable member for Joliette. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd say, Mr. Speaker, to begin, that along with my colleagues, we were very excited this morning to go to the lockup to find out about this important economic statement. Looking at the first pages, we were encouraged. We said, this is a government that recognizes the problems we are experiencing. The inflationary crisis, a global problem that has real impacts for the average person. People are having a hard time making ends meet. Prices have increased at the grocery store for energy, gas, all of that, not to mention the price of housing. So people are facing significant challenges, and the government said we have an inflationary crisis, and the finance minister a few days ago said, listen, there will be my economic statement because there's this inflationary crisis. Likewise, for the risk of a recession. Once again, that's at a global scale. Most economists and analysts are saying there's reason for concern. We could have a recession in 2023. The Bank of Canada, central banks, have decided to target a 1 to 3% rate of inflation. There's that 2% target. And to do so, there's monetary policy that is increasing interest rates. But when you increase interest rates, the economy slows down because there's less demand, and there's the risk of a global recession. This country's economy is facing the risk of recession in the coming year. And this government and the minister in her statement recognizes that. And so we congratulate them on that. When you go further into the document, the more you look over it, when you look at the charts and the numbers, when you compare it with what was in the budget last spring, you realize that it's nice rhetoric. They recognize the economic problems we're facing, but what solutions are put forward to deal with them? So, Madam Speaker, I must unfortunately say that we are left wanting. In fact, there are practically no new measures in this economic statement. We'll think of what has been put in place since the beginning of the fall, the commitments from the last budget. In 2024, there could be new measures, but today, what is there that's new? Not much.
In fact, there is something for students, and we in the Bloc Québécois, I'm the member for Joliette, but that doesn't help us really, because Quebec has its own separate loans and scholarship program. But for Quebecers, well, we can see that this is a measure that doesn't affect us directly. And then the government says, well, we're going to spend more to hire more public servants so that we can make sure services are better delivered. Because we saw with the matter of passports in the summer, there was a real backlog. There are a great many problems in terms of wait times. But that remains a very minor expenditure. And obviously, they talk about the sums that were announced for people in the Maritimes and Eastern Quebec, further to Hurricane Fiona. So we are very happy to hear about that commitment, but that is those are very minor amounts. So as we go through the economic statement, we see the word inflation more than 100 times. But what's the solution? Well, they're using solutions that they put in the spring budget, and so they're talking about this inflationary crisis, but they're simply serving up the same thing that they served up in the spring budget when inflation was never mentioned. So in Quebec, we love to eat this delicious dish. And it's something that is better heated up. And that is kind of like what we're seeing with this fall economic statement. It's simply a repeat of the budget. So we're seeing now a risk of recession. And the Bloc Québécois had already talked to the government about this and said, listen, we need concrete solutions to this coming inflationary crisis. There's a risk of recession. And the Bloc said, the EI system is broken. So how are we going to help the workers? We need something in place that works. And the government has recognized that the EI system is broken. It's not working. In fact, only 4 out of 10 workers who lose their jobs have access to EI. Since 2015, the government's been telling us, yes, it's coming. We're going to put in place the EI reform. It's been the same thing over and over for the past 7 years. And we were hoping that this time would finally be it, since the pandemic special measures were ending. But no, the government still hasn't fixed this broken EI system. Now the government is saying, well, we're heading into a recession. Okay, fine. Well, that means that the EI system desperately needs to be reformed. A number of consultations have been conducted. We know what needs to be done to fix this broken EI system. But once again, in this economic statement, the government has missed a golden opportunity to make the EI system better. So they announce that they're making an economic statement because they say, well, Canada's heading into a recession, but they don't fix the EI system. And I would just like to repeat what my colleague from Terrebonne said, which is this government working in isolation? Does the minister who's working on EI reform, did that minister talk to the Minister of Finance? Because it would have been the perfect opportunity to do so. Madam Speaker, we're in the midst of an inflationary crisis. Prices are going up, and the very first victims of these price hikes are people who have income that's not adjusted to inflation, and I'm talking about seniors. The government decided to help people aged 75 and over, but completely turned its back on seniors aged 65 to 75. So this government is creating two tiers of senior citizens. And now we're seeing major price hikes. Renovictions, we're seeing housing prices skyrocket, we're seeing grocery prices rise. And so we're seeing these seniors aged 65 to 75 who are running out of money. They don't have enough to buy groceries and they have to go to food banks. It's very humiliating. And in this statement, which recognizes that we're heading into an inflationary crisis, it recognizes it, but does nothing about it. It does nothing about these two classes of senior citizens. It does nothing to help the senior citizens aged 65 to 75, and that's simply against social justice. Madam Speaker, I'm going to posit something. Why is the government refusing to help seniors aged 65 to 75? Well, I think they want to ensure that the payments are no longer enough for seniors aged 65 to 75. And as such, these seniors will be forced to return to the labor market. I think that's the government's plan. So in 2015, the government was all proud that it had overturned the Conservative Act that had pushed the retirement age to a later date. But when we look at these people now, age 65 to 75, in the face of inflation, the government is bringing back a similar policy through the back door. That is, it's trying to ensure that people age 65 to 75 don't have enough money through public funds and pensions to make ends meet, and therefore they'll be forced to return to the labor market. That is highly hypocritical if that is the objective that is being targeted. And if that's not the objective, well, I don't know why the government is doing this. I imagine it must be crass incompetence, but it could also well be hypocrisy. It is unjust because often low-income people, when they reach retirement age, those are people who have worked hard all their lives. Often they're single women. They have no pension fund because they've been caregivers. They've stayed home to raise their family. And this government says that it's feminist, but it does not recognize their work and simply turns its back on them. So this government is making a statement. It says that we're in the midst of an inflationary crisis. But for the worst victims of this crisis, they are doing nothing at all. It's deplorable. So we should have seen assistance for these seniors in the statement, and it's not there. Shameful. Madam Speaker, we are seeing price hikes, we're seeing a risk of recession and an inflation crisis. And also our different societies in the provinces and in Quebec, well, this crisis is the healthcare crisis. There's no access to family doctors. The healthcare system is simply broken now because it was put through the ringer during the crisis. Our healthcare staff are burned out and the system is underfunded. And the problem started to happen back in the 90s when the federal government in Ottawa said, well, we're going to try and solve this problem of deficits and debt, so we're going to cut the health transfers. And then after the pandemic, when things started to get a little bit better, well, all the screenings, all the surgeries, all the health the surgeries were simply stopped, and the provinces in Quebec didn't know what to do anymore. So there's simply a lack of resources across the healthcare system. Why? Because for a very long time now, Ottawa has not been playing its rightful role. The governments in the provinces and the Quebec government they have said, Ottawa, step up. Fund us to the proper standards for our healthcare systems. And the PBO has said this year after year. He has said, there's a gap of $28 billion. So the provinces in Quebec need a 6% hike per year to cover the costs of healthcare. That is essential. And during this public health crisis, the federal government has a duty to fix this now, and it should have done so in the statement, especially since the government has just announced that in a few days, it's going to invite all the provincial healthcare ministers and the healthcare minister from Quebec to discuss the funding of healthcare systems. What is the federal government going to say? There's nothing in this statement. So what is there to discuss? Madam Speaker, when the very liberal and very colorful Minister Gaétan Barrette, when he was in his position, said that this government practiced predatory federalism. For example, he says the government put in place conditions but doesn't attach the necessary funding. So that liberal minister said that this liberal government practices predatory federalism. So we can see that all is not well in the Liberal family. So the Deputy Minister, Prime Minister, had a perfect opportunity to say, well, we're going to set the table for this meeting by attaching some funding. But how many times have the Bloc Québécois members, how many times have the members stood in this place to say, increase our funding? The government says, yes, it's coming, don't worry. We might believe that once or twice, but over 7 years, it's been happening constantly, and now we're fed up. What kind of message does that send to provincial health ministers? They're trying to fix their healthcare systems, which are collapsing, which have been put through the ringer during the pandemic, and now they're holding a meeting. And the figures have come out in this statement, and there's not one more cent for healthcare for this healthcare funding. It's shameful. And they stand up and they try to teach us lessons, but when it's time for them to play their role, they're simply not there. They're missing in action. And, for example, we've seen it with the passport system, with the immigration debacle. Everything that this government touches turns to dust. It becomes a fiasco, and the service is simply not there. And then they try and tell us how to do things, but they don't provide any additional funding. Madam Speaker, I referred to immigration. What the immigration minister announced a few years ago, that is an increase of targets to 25% by 2020.
I think that we've gotten most of what Gabrielle Sainte-Marie has been saying here. So I think we're going to start transitioning into a recap and analysis of what all was said in this speech, some major points, some major takeaways. So let's get into that. I'm going to pause this on Sainte-Marie. Some solid points there, to be certain. So this is the kind of section of the video where I'm going to turn off the chat from the corner here. You're going to be able to keep on chatting in the video, in the chat. It just won't be on screen because you get to see a little bit of the behind the scenes right here, because I'm going to take this snippet of the video and chop it out of the live stream and upload it on the channel so that people can get an update quickly on everything that was said here. Of course, I'll get to some questions at the end. So if you have any questions throughout this update, you can do at Russell Matthews in the chat, and it'll show up and be lit up on my screen so I can know that you're looking for it. So let's get into this. I'll turn off chat, take off these headphones, and get ready to record a little brief video here. Hey everyone, how's it going? We've just heard the Liberal government's federal economic update. This is one of 2 times in the year where we get information about what they're doing with their money, and we're going to go over some of the notes here. I've just finished watching the whole thing on the live stream, and now we're going to go over these notes, a summary of what was just said, and some main key takeaways, as well as what the other parties have to say about it, some of the major problems that they had with it, because this was rather shocking, and we'll get get to the reason why economic update here. Okay, getting to the top of my notes here. Here is the mini budget. So Chrystia Freeland started off by saying that she's visited a bunch of people in places across Canada, and she's talked to them about the high cost of living. The high cost of living. This is a big problem here in Canada. She brought up what the Liberals constantly bring up, is that global inflation isn't created by any one government, but by the actions of many governments. This is a sort of way of saying, hey, well, we're not the ones responsible for the high cost of living, but they are the ones responsible for solving it, for doing something about it. She says inflation was 6.9%, and it's on a falling trajectory, and it's lower than other countries, but people are still struggling. So a little bit more of saying, hey, this isn't totally our fault, and actually we're kind of in an okay position compared to other people. Of course, anyone in power would say, well, look, we're in a better position than other people. Then she tried to get real, said, it's important to be honest, things are going to be rough over the next while. Interest rates are rising. They're going to continue to rise as the Bank of Canada tries to fight inflation, and people are going to have to sort of buckle up, and things might get worse here over the next little while. She even says in the budget that we could be entering a recessionary period here. Although she says we're ready because we've invested in the social safety net. And then she goes on to list a number of programs that we already know about that have added to this social safety net, the Canada Child Benefit, the Student Loans Program, and Enhanced Canada's Worker Benefit. And she also brings up the point that all of these things are indexed to inflation, so as we have more inflation, those numbers go up for the amount that people get. And then she goes on to deliver the sort of highlights package from this budget, the main thing that she wants people to focus on. Some of them are new, only a couple of them really, and some of them are sort of repackaging of things that we already knew were coming. She addresses the reason for that after she gets questioned about it, and we'll get into that in a second. But first things first, this sort of laundry list of new things. The first one is that they're working to deliver lower credit card fees. You might have heard about the controversy about individual retailers and stores trying to pass on the credit card fees to individuals. Now that is legal in Canada, having the additional credit card fee for using your credit card in a store. And they say we're going to try to deal with that. We'll get into more details in the coming days about the specifics once I get a chance to comb through this big old document and break it down for you. The next one, taxes on share buybacks. This is one we expected to see. Talked about it in my most recent video just before the live stream, saying that these tax on share buybacks would be in this budget. A lot of people were looking for a windfall tax on excess profits to try to sort of gather more money for the government to put out social programs. This is what the NDP wanted, but we did not see that. The tax on share buybacks is essentially when a company is doing really well, they'll buy back shares in their company to essentially reduce the supply of shares on the market, essentially making each individual share more valuable to anyone that holds it. So it's a shareholder appreciation, like they'll do something good for their shareholders if they do well. So the government thinks that they'll make money from gathering this shareholder buyback tax, and also incentivize companies to invest more instead of doing these share buybacks, building more jobs in Canada. She says there's going to be a multi-generational housing tax credit, essentially trying to retrofit homes to fit more multi-generational families and more families living together across multiple generations. She said that they're going to tackle housing speculation. Again, we're going to get into the details and if they're doing anything new, but they've said they're going to tackle housing speculation a lot. Maybe this is an additional tax on vacant properties like they've done in Vancouver and now have implemented on a larger basis, but we'll get more into that in more detail in the coming days, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already done so. Moving on, she brings up again the new tax-free first home savings account. She says new, but this was announced actually, I think this was part of the Liberals campaign a year ago when we all went and voted. They said that they were going to bring this in. It's still not implemented yet. There are videos on the channel here. You can search Russell Matthews tax-free first home savings account, or TFHSA, and I have a detailed breakdown on how it's going to work, but no date yet on when it will be implemented to the best of my knowledge. Next, they said, and this was received with applause by the rest of the Liberal government, is that they're permanently eliminating interest on the federal portion of student loans. So different provinces have different systems for student loans. Essentially, they're saying, hey, we're going to give you this money, and while you're trying to pay it back after you finish your school, we're not going to charge you interest on that. However, that is just the federal portion. Most of the student loan is provincial, so it's really not as impactful as you might think or as it might sound. The next one is a new quarterly Canada Workers Benefit, supporting 4.2 million Canadians, she says. The Canada Workers Benefit has been around for a long time, supporting a lot of workers who don't make as much money on the lower end of the income spectrum, helping to top them up. The one major change here is that this used to be a tax benefit or a tax rebate. So you could only do it at the end of the fiscal year, right? Around April, when you're putting in your taxes, you would get more money back because you would be able to apply this tax credit. Now they're changing it to more of a benefit where you'll it looks like you're going to be able to qualify for this benefit based on the previous year's income, and then you'll actually get quarterly checks in the mail for the amount that you would have received in a lump sum. But it doesn't look like there's any enhancement here or any boost to the amount that you would get. And then she brings up the things that have already come into effect and actually start tomorrow, which is the doubling of the GST, happened with Bill C-30 when that passed. 11 million households who receive GST rebates. Well, those checks are going to start tomorrow as of Friday, and the people will receive a doubling of the typical GST tax credit, or rebate that they would be getting, not tax credit. All right, so then she gets into the fact, like that's the laundry list of things, but then she goes into more detail on some of them, so let's get into that now. We're providing targeted inflation relief, she says. We will not make the Bank of Canada's job harder. This is what the IMF warned Canada about, was make sure you're not spending too much because you're going to be counteracting what the Bank of Canada is trying to do, raising interest rates to destroy demand in the economy. Higher interest rates means people feel more strapped for cash. They have to pay more into their mortgages, so there's less money to go into other things, meaning there's less demand in the economy, meaning that there's not as much demand to buy goods and services, meaning those prices tend to have a downward pressure fighting against inflation, right? Inflation brings the cost of things up. They want to destroy the demand so that the cost of things comes down and we don't experience long-term inflation. She brings up, again, the fact that we have the lowest debt to GDP in the G7, saying, hey, things aren't as bad as they look because compared to other people, we're looking okay. Some people will sort of scoff at that a little bit, but this is what she said. We're now charting a fiscally responsible course, and the deficit is now only 1% of GDP. She says this is good because the pandemic spending actually worked. We had a GDP bounce back, more productivity. We kept a lot of our jobs. She says we, the Liberals, did a great job, and we got through this, and that is why we're in a positive position. Now, some people will argue that the government is in a better financial position for less savory reasons. One being the fact that there is such high inflation means that the dollars that we're paying in tax are greater, right? If a good is more expensive, you pay more GST on that. That goes to the government. It puts them in a better financial position. So in some ways, inflation is good for the Canadian government, along with one of our largest industries, oil, because obviously of the global conflicts, we have an increase in oil prices, and Canada makes more money on their oil, and the government can tax on that oil more. GDP looks better because of that. So that's something to consider. And she says we're going to be able to support in the future because we're keeping our powder dry today. Keeping our powder dry today. That's something that we should sort of emphasize here, because she does hint that, and she even says this explicitly at one point in the speech, that there will be more announcements coming soon. In the days and weeks and months to come, there will be more. No clarity on what this means, but she says because we're keeping our powder dry or our cash dry today, we're not spending it all, we're not blowing it all right now, we're going to be able to actually spend in the future, and more supports for Canadians could be coming in the future. But again, very cloudy, very gray, not really clear here. She says we're going to to focus on our minerals and natural resources to power the global net zero transition. She says we're in a good position because a lot of the things our allies need, they're turning away from Russia, and we kind of have some of the similar things that Russia had. So this is a good thing for our economy. We can grow to mine and process minerals. And seizing this opportunity is what she says we did in April when the last budget happened. They're going to add more tax credits and more money for companies that mine and process clean energy, energy goods. We're talking like lithium batteries, things to go in electric cars, processing there. That's where they're focusing all of their tax credits and incentives, is to help with that industry and transitioning away from the oil industry into more green, clean tech. And she also mentions the immigration plan that was just released, 1.4 million Canadians added to the country over the next 3 years, saying that we're going to help bring workers in specifically for these industries and for industries to help build more homes and nursing and doctors. This is what the Liberal plan is currently. And she says there's going to be more good jobs for Canadians because we're making these investments into clean energy. A lot of focus on clean energy here. And then she brings up a criticism of the Conservatives, saying workers know that we Liberals will never attack EI and CPP. That's the Employment Insurance and Canada Pension Plan. It's important. We'll never attack it. This comes on the back of the Conservatives attacking the Liberals a little bit, saying, hey, you need to pause all tax increases for the foreseeable future because people can't make ends meet. And this is, they're criticizing the EI and CPP contribution increase that's scheduled. But the Liberals say, hey, we know the social safety net is important, so we're not going to listen to what the Conservatives are saying in this instance. And she says the biggest difference that helps you in the economy is having a good job that you like with people who respect you. And our goal during the pandemic was to keep those jobs around. And because we're being such a strong industrial government, we're going to bring in more private investment to create good paying jobs. There's a Canadian Growth Fund that's being created to help sort of maybe some sort of matching program to bring in foreign investment or private investment rather, to build more companies, build more jobs, and they say we're going to help these companies grow by giving them taxpayer dollars. And so that is essentially her portion of the speech. Freeland got into a bunch of stuff, but it was a lot of it a repackaging of what she said in April. So a lot of people might be a little bit frustrated by this, the fact that there was nothing new, and certainly the members of the opposition party, the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois and the NDP, they all seemed pretty underwhelmed because it was a repackaging. Freeland got back to them saying, hey, this is just a fall economic update. I'm not going to bring a whole bunch of new stuff. I do that in April. So, but it was kind of an underwhelming response. But we're going to get into some of these critiques. One of the ones from the Conservatives is that they didn't cancel the carbon tax on home heating despite the potential 50 to 100% increase that we could see this winter with soaring energy prices. To this, she didn't really respond to the carbon tax criticism. She just said, hey, we understand times are tough, but hey, you're going to get the GST credit tomorrow starting then. This is a meaningful help along with the $500 for renters. Again, something that was or is in the process of being passed in Bill C-31. Again, I'm going to keep on going here, but if you want to stay up to date with everything that's been going on in Canada, subscribe to the channel because I'm going to get way more into detail in the coming days and weeks. And then we go on to the Bloc Québécois, who says, well, we look for what's new in this budget and there isn't anything. Where is the EI reform? A lot of people have been calling out Carla Qualtrough, who is the Minister for Disability Inclusion and Employment in Canada. A lot of people are kind of pissed at her for two different reasons. One, there is no employment insurance reform, and it doesn't look like we're going to see that for another 6 months, despite the Liberal government saying for essentially 7 years, we're going to reform EI to make it so that less people fall through the cracks. This could be especially important if, as the Bank of Canada raises interest rates, it will lower the amount of job availability, and people could end up losing their jobs as a result of an over-tightening of the Bank of Canada of interest rates. So this is something that is especially pressing right now, but nothing about it in the budget. Carla Qualtrough has constantly been saying, we're updating it, we're doing it, we're going to reform EI and make it so that gig workers can apply, and all sorts of Canadians will be able to rely on EI and in a worst case scenario. She's been saying this, but we have no information on the status of that. And especially in the past 2 years since we had to change EI temporarily for COVID when all these people lost their jobs, it became very clear that the EI system would have been very broken if we hadn't have created CERB and CRB. So they need to create some sort of reform here, and it wasn't in this budget. Very disappointing for a lot of people. But again, Chrystia Freeland sort of chimed in there saying, hey, remember, I will be announcing major new measures in the days and weeks to come, but no details about that. Okay, then we get into the NDP's criticism. They say there's a lot of measures in this budget that are familiar to us because you just repackaged the things we've been talking about. You might remember the NDP and the Liberals have a sort of, not a coalition, Pierre Poilievre likes to call it a coalition because they're kind of propping each other up, but it's not a formal coalition. The NDP agreed to vote in favor of all of the Liberals' bills as long as they, how do I phrase this? As long as they work in certain NDP demands into these bills, one of them being the dental care plan that they're bringing in right now. He says that was the only reference to healthcare in there. We like to see it, but dental was the only thing in there, and that was basically just because we were pressuring you. Where's your support for Canadians? Are you only going to do things when we force you to? Otherwise, there's going to be an election. That's what he's saying. And today was an opportunity to actually add something to help people. While he says Loblaws is making $1 million in excess profits per day. This is what Daniel Blakey, the NDP member of parliament, said. Where's the price fixing solutions? Where's the windfall tax? Where's a removal of GST home heating? This is something that the Conservatives and the NDP seem like they're actually working together on, that they're against the Liberals charging GST or any sort of tax on Canadians heating their homes. The Conservatives are more worried about the carbon tax side of things. The NDP are more worried about just removing the GST. But either way, they both are like, Liberals, what the hell? You're not doing anything here to help Canadians over the winter, even though other countries are. And he brings up the whole EI plan as well and how that's a big issue. And then the response to this is from Freeland, and she says, hey, one of the themes is that we're supporting working Canadians, or we're moving this Canada Workers Benefits to an advance payment, the quarterly payment instead of the tax rebate. So it kind of just repeats what she's previously said while not addressing the question. Then it came to Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, who gave quite a long and impassioned speech about all the problems with this budget and all of the ways that he would solve things. I'm going to sort of skim over this, but we could do a sort of mashup or update video here in the future that gets more into detail of it. But he says essentially, we're not going to support this budget. It's an inflationary scheme, there's bigger problems here that aren't being addressed. He's saying that there's a big housing problem because municipal and provincial governments aren't incentivized to make it quick for people to get building permits. He says that when he's prime minister, his words, that they'll be able to tie funding to the amount of houses that are actually produced, saying, hey, you're not getting any federal money, provinces or municipalities, unless you actually build more homes. This is one of the things that he talks about. He also goes into the money printing and sort of central bank criticism in one of the best explanations of what QE is, or quantitative easing is, that I've heard from a politician. Essentially the way that the Bank of Canada adds money to the system by buying Government of Canada bonds on the secondary market. I've made a video about that here on the channel, so you can check that out if you want to learn more about quantitative easing. He says this is a big problem, but as a solution, when Conservatives are in power, he says we're going to bring in a pay-as-you-go system. Every dollar that we end up spending, we got to find a dollar to cut somewhere, just like any other typical individual's budget works. Lots of people who follow modern monetary theory will say, hey, you shouldn't manage a government's pocketbook the same way you do an individual's, but that's a debate for another day. He says we'll get the Bank of Canada back to its core mandate of getting to 2% inflation and keeping it there, and we're auditing the central bank so that we can't do QE in the future. That's quantitative easing. He says, yes, we want to tackle climate change, but not with a stick, but with a carrot, incentivizing nuclear and other energy sources and cutting down on red tape for dams in Quebec, reforming tax and benefits so that when you take on more shifts and work to make more money, you'll not get that money clawed back. This is something that I think a lot of people who may be familiar with employment insurance or disability benefits, might be familiar with, oftentimes people will find themselves not incentivized to go back to work because once they make a certain amount or once they make $1, every dollar they make gets paid back to the EI program because it says, hey, you're working now, you don't need as much support. But as a result, people are incentivized to not go back to work because every dollar they make is really only 50 cents or potentially 25 cents because it's getting paid back into a program. He says, we're going to reform these taxes and benefits so that people are actually incentivized to go back and work. If you want to take on an extra shift, you're going to be making more money, as much money as you plan to when you take on that extra shift, because we're going to remove these clawbacks. Okay, that was most of Pierre Poilievre's points there. Daniel Blakey got back up saying that he wants to work with the Conservatives to remove the home heating tax. And then Gabriel Saint-Marie, the Bloc Québécois member of Parliament, says that this country is facing a risk of a recession, but looking at the document, there's not much in here. There's no solutions for it. Back in April, when the budget was presented, the government of Canada didn't mention a recession in the budget. They didn't mention inflation in the budget. But in this economic update, this mini budget, they've said, hey, there is inflation, there is a recession looming, or perhaps we're already in one. It's just 3/4 of negative or even growth of Canadian GDP. He says, even though you talked about two different situations, not mentioning inflation and now mentioning it, you just have all the same measures in here that you did last time. So it's good rhetoric. You're saying, yes, we recognize it, but you're not doing anything different to solve it. So that is the end of my notes. I need to take a drink of water here because that was a lot of talking for 10 minutes. Was that 10 minutes, 12 minutes? I don't know, but I think we're going to call this video here. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so, because we're going to be more in depth on these topics, figuring out exactly what this means for you and your money in the days and weeks to come. So with all that said, thanks so much for watching. I really hope this video helped you out at least a little bit. And I'll see you next time. Okay, hey everyone on the live stream. That was a big time of me not being able to talk to you because I'm going to clip that out for the YouTube video. But now, yeah, I have about 3 or 4 minutes here that I can take any questions. I hope that update was helpful for you and that sort of analysis of what all was said in this budget. Again, if you have a question here, you can go at Russell Matthews, and hopefully that helps you out. Yeah, thanks, Nelio. You've been so nice. Ninja says, the double GST for 6 months, is that all coming tomorrow, November 4th, or is tomorrow half and the other half comes in January? It'll be a doubling of every single GST that you receive over the next 2 months. People receive them quarterly, meaning you're just going to get a doubled one tomorrow or in the coming days if you receive it by mail, and then another one in January. So it is quarterly. You're not going to get the full doubling amount tomorrow. You're going to get it every 3 months for 2 periods of that because it's only 6 months. Ryan Maharaj says, any specifics on disabled Canadians, i.e. dental program? Not from this speech that I've gathered. I do have the document up over here, but I gotta give it a better look here to make sure that I'm not missing anything from the document. But to my understanding, no additional information on the disabilities dental program. Again, those are going to be the first people who receive dental care if the Liberals follow this NDP sort of road of adding dental care into the Canadian social safety net. Again, lots of frustration with Carla Qualtrough because while she hasn't brought EI reform, she also hasn't brought any kind of details about the Canada Disability Benefit. That's something that has actually now passed through the House of Commons, but there's no details on how it's going to work or when it's going to happen. So hopefully that helps you, Ryan Maharaj, a little bit. Thanks, Melton, for the kind words. Mr. Clancy says UBI, no UBI in this budget and this mini update. Kind of to be expected that it wasn't going to be in here because the Liberals have been preaching financial prudence now over the past number of days, saying, hey, we got to be careful here not to spend too much to counteract what the Bank of Canada is doing. However, this is against what most of the party wants them to do. When I say most of the party, I don't just mean the members of Parliament, but I mean the people who identify as Liberals There was a Liberal convention last year where there were 3 separate UBI policies voted on, and everyone who was at that the Liberal convention says, we want this, but it seems that the high ups at the Liberal Party don't really want it as much, because you'll never hear Trudeau really talking about a UBI, along with Freeland talking about a UBI, even though their party and their convention has voted in favor of bringing a policy like this forward. So hopefully that's helped you out, Mr. Clancy, and I think DM9542 asked about that as well. Steven says, Russell, how long do you think till rent starts to fall to more affordable prices? This is tricky. It's tricky because there's a lot of factors that go into this. I actually don't need these still. I'm not listening to anything. It's tricky to know because right now we have a time where interest rates are extremely high, right? This means that a lot of people could be putting off those initial first home purchases. That means that, okay, there's less demand in the market. Real estate could be going down in price. And actually, Stephen Poloz, a former Bank of Canada governor, said he doesn't expect to see the bottom for another year to a year and a half. But this means for renters that those stock of renters that would have been able to buy a home now, because of the interest rates, they can't. In fact, affordability has gotten worse since the interest rates have gone up, even though housing prices are down. This means there's a larger group of renters, meaning there could be upward pressure on rental prices for the next little while here. However, that being said, with more Canadians being more strapped for cash, interest rates are higher, everyone is feeling negative in terms of their finances right now and in their investments. It could mean that people are more prudent with the rental accommodations that they get, more people living in larger group homes, maybe living with family. So that could ease some pressure from the rental demand, but I don't expect it to soften that meaningfully for a number of months, if not a year from now, is my estimation. But again, it's very complicated. It's lots of different factors, so nobody has a crystal ball when it comes to those things. Yeah, okay. So hopefully that has covered most of your questions. I'm going to cut off the stream now. We're going to finish up here. Thank you everyone for watching. I really appreciate you tuning in. I get to have actual more back and forth conversation with you. One more question. Ninja says, if we bring in 1.4 million immigrants who will have no credit in Canada, won't there be a flood of renters? Yeah, I mean, that could be a floor both on real estate prices and rental prices as well, as more Canadians coming in. Good point there. And Lisa says, if Canadians gave Trudeau a minority government, but he formed a coalition with NDP to get a majority, that goes against what Canadians voted for and should be illegal. I mean, I personally am not a fan of these sort of handshake agreements. There's nothing that's illegal about it. There's nothing that's wrong about it per se. But I agree that, yeah, we kind of didn't vote for the Liberals to have this kind of power, right? It's supposed to be a minority government, but that being said, people did vote for the NDPs to represent them, so whatever the NDPs want to do, I guess, is a representation of their constituents, but I guess NDP voters would have to get mad at the NDP for doing this if they didn't feel well represented. Good point, though. Nolio says, more live streams. Maybe I'll try to work more of them in. I have a good time doing them always, and I appreciate the support and the super chat or the $10 donation that you gave there, Nulio. It's much appreciated for doing these streams. I appreciate it. Russell Matthews for Finance Minister 2025. Maybe I'll eat my words someday, but I don't think you could convince me to get into politics when there's so much frustration in watching it. Just from a viewer's perspective, I couldn't imagine trying to talk to these people and trying to and having to go along party lines when things are more nuanced. I think that'd be frustrating. But anyways, that is it for today, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. I'm going to play an ad here right at the very end just to help support the channel, so I appreciate you sticking around to take a look at that. But with that said, thanks so much for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the upcoming videos when we get into more details. I'll see you next time. Okay, I'm calling it there. Finish my coffee. We got to end the stream at some point. Bye, everyone.